we got this made when we were just really pissed off one day. Just
all right. Well, everyone, I'm starting the webinar. Participants are coming in.
Thank you. So we'll have to save that story, Hillary, for another time.
Hey, welcome everyone. We'll be going to Facebook Live in about 2 minutes. Thanks for coming today. All right, everyone, we're starting the streaming service. Just one moment. Okay.
Thank you everyone for joining us. As everyone on this call knows, we had a very stunning upset in the state of Georgia, both in November and in January. And after both of those victories for Democrats, we heard a cry raised by Republicans that they wanted to fix a system that they were also arguing wasn't broken. Essentially, they want to make voting harder for Georgians to make it easier for themselves to win elections. We know that this is absolutely targeted at communities of color, at those young people who are showing up, and at the new coalitions that are being built. But particularly for communities of color who exercise their power to change Georgia first on November 3rd and then in dramatic fashion on January 5th.
The attacks on the right to vote that we're now seeing introduced in state legislatures across the country, but particularly in Georgia and other Deep South states, are in direct response to the record turnout of Black and brown voters. These efforts also continue to fuel the dangerous voter fraud rhetoric and conspiracy theories that led to the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th.
Republicans in Georgia seem to be wanting to make up for following the law in the general election. What are we to make of the current legislative efforts of the Republican legislature? It is nothing more than pandering to the worst instincts of conspiracy theorists who have been spreading lies in Georgia for weeks and weeks and months, and an effort to make it harder for Black, brown, and young voters to vote in a hope that by embracing those conspiracy theories, they will lead to different outcomes in elections in the future.
Black voters took advantage of the voter access laws that Georgia state legislators wrote and passed. Laws that were just fine and in fact good until voters of color used them to exercise their power. And because voters of color decided to show their power at the polls, we saw right-wing, white supremacists use Georgia State Senate and state House committees to spread disinformation and recruit insurrectionists. What's alarming is that their rhetoric about so-called election fraud plays right into the hands of far-right white supremacist conspiracists who stormed the U.S. Capitol.
It is unconscionable that Republicans would respond to the engagement of voters of every color, of every creed, and across every region of Georgia and across the states of the U.S. by trying to retract and retrench on voter suppression.
It's not to improve the elections, it's not to improve access to the elections, it's not to improve accuracy of the elections, it's not to prevent fraud in the elections. It's not to make the elections cheaper. It's not to make the elections easier to administer. It is simply to pander to the worst instincts of false and conspiracy theories and lies, and to try to achieve a partisan benefit. It is a shame.
We are watching a response to a lie. And the worst response to a lie is to further that lie by embedding it in state law.
We are prepared to fight every Republican attempt to roll back voting in Georgia. And if Georgia Republicans think that they are going to restrict the franchise and roll back voting rights, and particularly do so in a way that is targeted at Black, brown, and young voters, they have another thing coming. We will see them in court and we will win.
Good evening. I'm John Jackson, Chair of the DeKalb County Democratic Committee. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our program about the outrageous challenges facing voting rights here in Georgia. We have so much to be proud of. We flipped our state blue, and we are directly responsible for flipping the Senate blue. But because of our successes, Republicans are attempting to strip us of hard-earned voting rights. We cannot let that happen. This evening, you'll hear from legislators who are fighting the battle for us at the Capitol and from other organizations also battling on our behalf. They'll help us understand the challenges and how we can support their work. I want to thank our Policy and Legislative Committee led by Janet Grant for organizing this program, and a special welcome and thanks to our co-sponsors this evening. Gloria Moore, Vice Chair and Special Events Coordinator, will introduce our co-sponsors and our moderators for this evening.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. And I'd like to add my welcome to John's. Thank you, everyone, for spending some time with us this evening. We know how critical and valuable your time is, so we do absolutely appreciate not only our speakers and participants and co-sponsors, but also our audience for taking the time to be with us this evening. As John noted, one of the fact of the matter is that the challenges to voting rights are statewide. It's for all of us in Georgia. And that's why I'm so delighted this evening to be able to introduce co-sponsors with us. Because one of the things we're going to have to all do is collaborate and coalesce. We are going to have to work together to fight off these challenges to our voting rights. So first of all, I'd like to let you know that we have with us Cobb County and Gwinnett County and the Jewish Democratic Women's Salon. And I want to give each of them an opportunity to just take a minute and speak to the issue at hand. I'm going to start with President of the Cobb Democratic Women, Chinita Allen. And Chinita, would you just give us a few words, please?
Oh, absolutely. Well, first I want to say thank you, John, and thank you, Gloria, for the invite. Cobb Democratic Women, we are always willing to collaborate and to join forces. We know what can happen when we get together. We saw what happened with our new U.S. senators, and we also saw what happened in Cobb County, right? What a phenomenal election cycle we had. In terms of voting rights and voting restrictions, there's so much going on at the Capitol. I really appreciate the fact that Gloria and John, that you all have brought in the experts on this. I've heard from several senators who've contacted me, and they've been talking about, what is going on at the Capitol. And I do feel like there is a sense of that we do need to create a sense of urgency for what is going on. We just saw recently in the news today about Fulton County, what happened with their election chair, had conversation about that. And while we definitely don't want that to happen in Cobb County, I'm pretty sure we are planning for that not to happen. But I think tonight is a good time for us all to get together to collaborate and to hear from the experts about what we can personally do and what our organizations can do to help combat this voter restriction pattern that seems to be taking place.
Thank you, Chinita. I appreciate that. And also from Cobb County is the chair of the Cobb County Democratic Committee. And Jacqueline Betador. Oh, darn.
Yeah,
I was really
that's
hoping
all
to
right.
get it. I'm so sorry.
No, no worries. Thank you. Thank you, Gloria. And thank you for putting this event together. And we'd like to thank you for all the collaboration and commitment to all the county committees that you've shown through the general election and through the special election. So we really appreciate DeKalb Dems in coordinating these efforts. Here in Cobb County, we've been engaged with the Cobb County Board of Elections for going on 2 years now. And it started off with precinct changes at the 11th hour. And then we sort of got into trying to increase access to early voting. And then rolled into a June 9th primary that was a complete disaster in Cobb County. And interesting enough, it just basically impacted our South Cobb region, which is where we have the highest density proportion of Black and Brown voters. So it impacted, out of all the precincts impacted, something like 25 out of 29 of them were in that South Cobb region. So Cobb responded. We've been working quite closely with the delegation and the Board of Elections and Fair Fight and the DPG to rectify that, and saw a general opening up of early vote access. And we had 16 drop boxes installed in the county for absentee voting. And miraculously, with those efforts, election day sort of became a non-event. We didn't have any big lines. We didn't have any major crises in the county. So roll over into special elections, they tried to cinch down on our early vote access once again. And again, with the help of the delegation, we were able to institute some last minute changes to increase that early vote capacity so that it didn't match the general election, but it did increase from what was originally planned. So all this speaks to working with and collaborating with the delegation, with the DPG and with Fair Fight on all fronts. And we're committed to engaging our membership to engage their legislative representatives, especially in Republican districts. We know we've got the Democratic districts covered, but we need to make our voices heard with the Republican representatives in our county. And to that effect, we are holding an event on February 23rd. We are co-hosting with the Cobb County delegation and with Fair Fight to address these very same issues we'll be addressing tonight, voting rights in Cobb County. So we'll be getting word out about that as well. So again, thank you for hosting this tonight.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for that information. We really appreciate it. Joining us from the Jewish Democratic Women's Salon, Atlanta, is Ellen Williams. Ellen, how are you this evening?
Well, I'm great, thanks, because I'm really pleased to be here and just so pleased that voting rights is getting the attention that it needs to get, not just during election season, but also in between the election cycle. But thank you very much for including us. We're really honored to be here. Jewish Democratic Women's Salon is relatively young. We started in 2012 when we became concerned about the conservatism that was being embraced in Georgia, and we moved from concern to outrage in 2016, and we now have about 1,600 members that are pretty active. And our goal is to educate and engage our members. Most of our members are also involved in a lot of other organizations. I know I am. And So we try to stay on top of things and keep people energized and encourage them to get involved. And so my role with JDWS is specifically to keep people focused on voter protection and voter engagement, because it's not just protecting the right to vote, it's getting people to vote and making sure that they can vote. So I encourage our members to get involved in numerous ways. So I look forward to hearing from everybody about what we can do to make sure we protect Georgians' right to vote.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you so much. And also co-sponsoring this event is the Gwinnett County Democratic Party. And is Brenda Lopez here? Okay. Brenda may be running late, but we do appreciate the Gwinnett County folks supporting us as well. And they have in the past and certainly will continue to. At this point, I'd really like to hand the program over to our moderators, Susan McQuethy and Janet Grant, who will introduce our panelists and implement the program, if you will. So thank you all so much for your time. And Janet, Susan.
Great, thank you, Gloria, and thanks to all of our co-sponsors for supporting this program this evening. We are really pleased to have you here to learn more about the voting challenges that we're facing in this legislative session. We are going to, Susan and I have a number of questions prepared for our panelists, and we'll go through some discussion with them, but we're really anxious to have your questions to be able to pose to them as well. So on your Zoom screen, you have a chat function, but you also have a Q&A function. So if you can put your questions in that Q&A function, we'll try to get to just as many of those as we can a little bit later in the program. We also want to thank Karen Mixon. She's our first vice chair here at DeKalb Dems and does just about everything. And she and her team are providing the technical support for this evening, which is always a complicated affair. So thank you to Karen. Our panelists tonight are really an amazing group of legislators and activist leaders in our community. And so we are thrilled to welcome Representative B. Nguyen, who's joining us from the House of Representatives, and then we, unfortunately, it looks like Gloria Butler, our minority leader in the Senate, must be a little delayed. So we're hoping that she will be joining us here shortly. And then we also have Saira Draper, who is the voter protection director at the Democratic Party of Georgia. And I think we all saw the impressive work of voter protection during this last election cycle. So we're thrilled to have Saira here. And also thrilled to have a representative of Fair Fight. Hillary Holly is here, and you saw the video at the beginning of the program that showed the work, very important work of Fair Fight here in Georgia. And then Minority Caucus Chair, Senator Elena will be joining us in a little bit. She had a previous commitment, so she will be joining us. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Susan, who's going to get us started.
Good evening, everybody. For many years, Republicans have realized that they can achieve electoral success largely by restricting voting rights. They openly admit that when more people vote, they lose elections. When provisions of the 1965 Voting Rights Act were eviscerated in 2013, Republican legislatures went into overdrive to rig the system to make it more difficult for marginalized voters to exercise their right to vote. This strategy is in high relief in this legislative session. Republicans are scared because of the enormous success of the November election, where a record 68% of Georgia voters turned out. The former president flooded the media with lies about the insecurity of absentee ballots, even sabotaging the post office, to subvert the process, which later morphed into distrust of the voting technology. His strategy failed. Out of their fear of future Democratic success, it is not surprising that the Republican bills introduced this year in the Georgia legislature fall down squarely on the side of voter suppression. Fortunately, our Democratic legislators are introducing bills to do the opposite, to make it easier for every legitimate voter to exercise their right to vote. So let's hear from some of those good Democrats.
John, you all have brought in the experts on this. I've heard from
some bills to do the opposite, to make it easier for every.
Susan,
What?
Susan, you're on mute.
Am I not? Did you hear me before?
Now you're good.
Okay, thank you. I don't know how that happened. Okay, so I'd like to, where are our panelists? Can we see our panelists? I would like to start with a question. I'd like each panelist to take about 2 minutes to share. I thought we might start with Senator Butler, but apparently she's not here yet. The question is, of all the bills that Republicans have introduced that would suppress the vote, which do you consider to be the most egregious? And I do not see the.
Why don't we start with Representative Nguyen?
Oh, yeah, Representative Nguyen, yeah, you're muted. Hillary, you're muted. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Hi, y'all. Thanks for having me on. Thanks to John Jackson and Gloria Moore for putting this together. And hello to my voting rights friends, Saira and Hillary Hawley. We obviously know that this is a group effort and it requires everybody at the table to fight against the voter suppression bills that we are seeing in the General Assembly. Let me start by saying this. I don't think it's a matter of which bill is the most dangerous bill to voters in Georgia. I think fundamentally the issue at hand is the efforts to restrict voting, which we know is part of our history in this country. It has always been about restricting access to voting, and other groups who were not given the right to vote had to fight for that right. And we are continuing to see that manifest in other ways. And fundamentally, there's a difference in ideology, which is Republicans do not believe that it is a fundamental right that belongs to every person who has citizenship in this country. And I would go as far as to say, even though we're not specifically talking about this, but the laws around citizenship were to prohibit voting in the first place. That's where all of this sort of originated back in the day too. But I would say the efforts in general to restrict voting is just an extension of what they've been trying to do in this state. And all of the bills are dangerous because each one of them opens the door to more restrictive voting policies. And among those are certainly attacks on absentee ballot voting, secure drop boxes, but even things like same-day voter registration, as well as funding for our local elections boards. And I know that we'll talk more in depth about all of those things. And so my view is we cannot give a little or compromise on this idea that voting should be expansive and accessible for everybody. And there are certainly bills that would hurt Georgia voters in greater numbers than others, but in general, yielding on any of these things sets a precedence that says that we are okay with voter restriction laws.
Thank you. Can we hear from Hillary?
Yeah, so
Please.
Yeah. So thank you so much for having me this evening. Hi to DeKalb, the Jewish Women's Democratic Salon. Good to see you all. I 100% agree with Representative Nguyen. When you, right, as of this evening, we are up to 40 anti-voting bills in Georgia's legislature. And to what Representative Nguyen was saying, these bills collectively would fundamentally change democracy in the state of Georgia. They are, and it's almost at every single point of access that they're coming. And so we cannot bend on any of this. Just to give you all a view into the possibilities that we're seeing. They are first trying to ban third parties from sending out absentee ballot request forms. This is something that the Democratic Party of Georgia has done. The Donald Trump campaign did it. The Georgia GOP did it. Campaigns can do this. A lot of times, smaller community organizations can do this. And it is one way that they are trying to make it harder for folks, because as you all know, when third parties send out absentee ballot request forms, you can then follow up with them. They're more likely to fill it out because they are receiving this information from a trusted organization in which they're a part of. They're also then just trying to restrict trying to ban no excuse vote by mail, which would just fundamentally change democracy in Georgia, because a lot of voters, specifically our elder voters over the age of 55, have always utilized vote by mail, specifically Republican voters. And this is another way that we know that this is just clearly designed to suppress the vote, even if it's going after their own voters. That's how desperate they are. They are also trying to ban automatic voter registration, meaning that if you go to the Department of Driver Services, you will no longer automatically be registered unless you opt out. They will now require people to opt in, and which will also then increase the burden on third parties to do voter registration drives. It will also make the burden a lot harder on the counties, because they will then have to process a lot of paper registration applications as well. So like Representative Nguyen said, this whole, the slew of bills are just egregious. And the reason why there hasn't been a lot of calls to action right now is not because no one's paying attention, but it's because the Georgia Republican Party is all over the place. The factions, you have Governor Kemp fighting with certain people, Brad Raffensperger fighting, Jeff Duncan, Speaker Ralston, Burt Reeves, Senator Dugan. They don't have their stuff together. And so what our side is doing is we are on hold. We are watching everything. We know everything that's been filed. We're tracking it, researching it, have analysis, have talking points, everything to support our legislators. But we are still expecting even more packages to come. And we are actually expecting packages to come that will be forced through the legislator pretty quickly. And so that's why right now we're saving a lot of our volunteer activity to when we really need to hone in on very specific pieces of legislation. So hold tight, the fight is coming. But right now it's really just watching to see what they're doing, because they're still trying to get their stuff together on their side.
Thank you. That was frightening. Can we hear next from Saira, please?
Hi, Susan. Hi, everyone. Saira Draper, DPG Voter Protection Director. Thank you so much for having me on here, the formidable DeKalb Democrats and all the co-sponsors. It is a pleasure to be here, and the esteemed co-panelists. Good to see you all. So many great bills to choose from when you're trying to pick the worst one. There's ones that are just so blatant, right, that all they're doing is trying to suppress the vote. So I'll speak on a couple that maybe aren't so blatant, but can cause a lot of damage. So one that I've been watching is HB 62, which says that no third parties can contribute funds to elections offices, county elections offices. This year we saw unprecedented changes due to COVID, but also Georgia had a large number of elections and it had an unprecedented number of recounts. And because of that, our elections officials were working around the clock, and what had been budgeted for them, they required a lot more funds than what had been budgeted for them. There were organizations, third-party organizations that had grants available to county elections offices that many counties in Georgia took advantage of. Many of these counties were blue. Many of these counties were red. And to many of these counties, especially the small counties, these extra funds that they were able to apply for and use to administer elections this year were an absolute lifeline. They could not have done it without them. Republicans are not saying that we are going to fund elections, county elections offices. They're not providing that. And now they're also trying to prohibit these counties from getting these funds in other places. And there's really no reason for that other than to make the process of voting more difficult, to decrease the resources that they have access to and have them do more with less. So that is something I'm very concerned about. And it does seem to be, just under the radar at this point. Another one that we've been watching is ones that sound good potentially, but then they're poison pilled at the last minute. So one we were looking at last week was a ranked choice voting bill for our overseas voters. Ranked choice voting is something that other states do, but we don't do here in Georgia. Basically what the bill was saying was that for our overseas voters, they would have the option to rank choice potential runoff candidates. And if there was a runoff, they wouldn't have to be sent an absentee ballot a second time. They would have their choices ranked, and their runoff vote would already be submitted when they submitted their vote for the general. It sounds like a great idea, except when you consider that there was a provision that was put in that bill at the last minute that said, oh, and by the way, all runoffs are going to be held, I think it's 28 days after the general election. When you move all runoffs that close to the general election hasn't even been certified yet. It hasn't even been finished yet. So you wouldn't even know who was in the runoff. And it's just practically impossible for a county to administer a runoff election while the general election is still going on. So, something that might sound good in practice, when the representative was proposing the bill and speaking to the subcommittee about his bill, he said, oh, we saw so many ads for Loeffler, Perdue, Ossoff, Warnock. Wouldn't it be great if we don't have to watch those ads for such a long time? Wouldn't it be great? The only people that win are the media companies that play those advertisements. But what they were forgetting was that it's practically impossible to do a runoff that close after the general election. And so those kinds of bills that don't take the practical realities of administering an election into consideration, those are very dangerous bills. And the fact that they're trying to ram these things through without talking to the elections administrators themselves to see what they want to do, that is very problematic, and it's also very telling. So those are two that we're keeping a close eye on, in addition to the many others we are keeping a close eye on.
Thank you. And has Senator Butler arrived yet?
I don't see her yet.
Don't see her, okay. Well, the next question, oh, sorry, Janet, go ahead.
Thanks, Susan. Well, you can see that the panelists that are with us tonight are really experts in all of this. So the next question is maybe a little bit of another twist on what we just talked about. And that is, which bills do you think really have the possibility of advancing? In other words, where should we put our efforts in terms of trying to fight these bills? I can't imagine that all 40 are going to advance, but there's probably some priority ones for the Republicans where we really should be focused. And Hillary already spoke a little bit to this. Hillary, do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, so one thing, and one reason why we're still holding on a lot of the call to actions is Senator Mike Dugan, who is one of the legislative leaders in the Senate, has continued to say that he is rolling out an ominous bill. Y'all, I can't say that word, don't make fun of me. But it's going to be a very lengthy bill. If you all are familiar, after the 2018 election, when they introduced HB 316, and it was just several pages long, we're expecting another bill like that. And so, and that's why when we get that bill, the reason why we are going to spend a lot of time on that specific one is because that's the bill that the Republican leadership have all agreed on like their priorities. And so rather than trying to play whack-a-mole with these 40 bills, it strategically makes sense to see, let's see what Senator Mike Dugan will introduce. We are thinking he said tomorrow, so we shall see. And that's what we'll see. But just based on a lot of the recent interviews, so Lieutenant Jeff Duncan and Brian Kemp, and then Brad Raffensperger, and recently said on CNN or US Today through an op-ed by Brad Raffensperger, they seem very keen on rolling back vote by mail accessibility, specifically with the the photo ID requirement. And so if I had a bet, that is, they are really focused on vote by mail. And remember, because it wasn't just 2020 that we made significant gains. Like, this has been building over time. It scared the crap out of them in 2018. We then sealed the deal twice in 2020, and they know that it will just continue to build and build. So that's why we think that will be their priority, but we'll see the exact language any day now.
Okay, great. Thank you. Representative Nguyen, how about from the House side? What are you seeing there in terms of which you think are really going to advance?
So I agree with Hillary. I do think that the ID portion will advance. We've gotten pretty consistent messaging from the Speaker of the House, the Lieutenant Governor, and the Governor that they do support the ID requirements on vote by mail. I think there's real fracture within the Republican Party as far as how far they will go for some of the other voter restriction laws. But the ID portion, I think we'll certainly see advancement on that. And then we've got a bill on the House side related to imposing an earlier deadline on when election boards are able to issue absentee ballots. Originally, the way in which the bill was written said that election boards are prohibited from issuing any absentee ballots 10 days ahead of the election, which we know would be problematic given that many people saw delays in receiving their absentee ballots because of the huge volume in the June primary, because we are a state that for the first time was learning how to vote by mail in such large numbers. And there are cases in which voters requested their absentee ballot months ahead of time, and it did not arrive until close to election day, or it didn't arrive at all, and they had to resubmit a request. And then there's also the issue of what happens if your ballot is spoiled because you spilled something on it, but you requested it way in advance and you just need a new ballot. So that prohibition would have really crippled elections boards and actually not hold them accountable in any way for meeting deadlines. Some of that bill has been amended to make the deadline incumbent on the voter in terms of the absentee ballot request. So I expect that bill to potentially move forward. What I think Republicans on the House side are currently doing right now is they're taking bills that seem innocuous in nature and trying to move those forward first. But I would also say in the General Assembly, things are very unpredictable. There are many instances in which we feel that bills are so egregious that they would never move forward. A good example of that is the 6-week abortion ban. Ahead of that, getting a hearing and passing on the floor and getting signed into law, the general sentiment was they're probably not going to move forward with this bill. So I always think that we have to take into consideration that anything is possible, especially with 2022 elections next year, and they know that they're in a space where those elections are going to be close. And what they do this legislative session will have an impact on those elections. And it's probably a political calculation of what they can get away with or what they perceive they can get away with while also restricting voter access.
Great, thank you. Saira, anything to add to that?
I think Hillary and Representative Nguyen have covered it.
Okay. I'll kick it back to Susan.
Okay. This session, the special committee on an election integrity was created specifically to hear bills about voting issues. Previously, these bills were heard by the Governmental Affairs Committee. It would be interesting to understand why it was created. Why was it necessary, or was it necessary, and how the members of that committee were selected. Representative Nguyen, maybe you have some insight into this?
I can only make guesses about why the committee was created. Our Governmental Affairs Committee, the Democratic members on there, we worked very well together, and we have spent the past few sessions being very effective, in terms of fighting against voter suppression and working with our allied orgs to make sure that we were up to date on voting bills. And quite frankly, there were a lot of us on that committee that were just not afraid to go head to head with Republicans. I am told that committee was created because the Governmental Affairs Committee just didn't have the capacity to handle all the elections bills that we expect to see this session. We've seen special committees created on really controversial bills. An example is when we were considering the Medicaid waiver bill instead of full Medicaid expansion, a special committee on healthcare access was created. There is also a special committee on civil justice, and that committee was created to address tort reform. And it is a very strategic move on the speaker's part, and he had sole discretion on who to appoint to the Special Elections Committee. And, the makeup is 10 Republicans, 4 Democrats. Out of all the Democrats that have been on governmental affairs who have dealt with election laws, only 1 of those Democrats was selected. I requested to be on the committee. I sent a letter up, but I was not given that spot.
I just want to, I'm going to brag on Representative Nguyen. So the Governmental Affairs Committee was amazing. The Democrats still are phenomenal. Representative Nguyen, Representative Shannon, and I'm forgetting others, but the man, Representative Fleming, Barry Fleming, who serves on the Governmental Affairs Committee, but was appointed chairman of the Elections Integrity Committee. He is I'm just, to be very blunt, a very evil man. Barry Fleming has done Brian Kemp and Chris Harvey's bidding for many, many years now, going back to 2014. One of the most egregious things is he is a prosecutor at heart. And he worked with a lot of police officers down in his district in Sparta, Georgia, to actually send police officers to Black people's homes to challenge their voter registration status. Barry Fleming has been very instrumental in helping with the criminalization of voting for many, many years. And so I am sure that Representative Fleming did not like the fact that 2 very strong women who believe in voting rights could outperform him and come with wonderful arguments. So I'm sure, as Representative Nguyen said, the Speaker Rawson was very strategic and wanting Barry Fleming to feel special again and have his own committee. So this is a response to having amazing Democrats in governmental affairs.
Yeah, I was afraid of that answer. Okay, Janet.
Yeah.
Saira, I'm sorry, Saira, did you?
No, just a shout out to Representative Williams and Oliver and Bernot, who are also on that committee and do an excellent job. And Representative Bernot is on the new committee, and she has been, wonderful. And I will say the Democrats on the new committee also have all been wonderful and have been learning about election law and have been doing what they need to do. So this is definitely strategic, of course, but we have great people in place. I don't want to forget that bit.
Of course, yeah. Thank you. Janet?
So I see that Senator Parent has joined us, my very own senator. Welcome, Senator Parent. So let's go over to you and have you be able to give us a little perspective from the Senate perspective on the voting rights bills that we have seen introduced and kind of the Senate Democratic Caucus strategy in terms of trying to fight these.
Great. Well, good evening, everyone. It is wonderful to see this huge turnout and to see so many friends. Thank you all for everything that you are doing. Before I even talk about the bills, it's my first meeting since the victories on January 5th. And it was so incredible to see DeKalb County and the work that you guys specifically have done be spotlighted and highlighted as the returns came in, and in the aftermath analysis as well. As a matter of fact, just a couple days ago, seeing national news articles about how DeKalb County showed up in huge numbers and basically flipped those Senate seats. So I hope everyone's given themselves a huge pat on the back. Obviously, we know our work is never done, but you guys are amazing, and thank you for all that DeKalb Democrats has done. So many of you are aware that right now, while we have bad bills rolling back voting, that would roll back voting rights in both chambers, the Senate, if anything, has been more aggressive. The Senate Republicans sort of led the efforts at the outset to bring Rudy Giuliani and crew to the Capitol with sham hearings. And in the news from soon thereafter have had leaders of that caucus be very clear that they intended to try to roll back voting rights. And at this juncture, we have probably close to 25 or 30 bills. The numbers grow daily. Ones that roll back voting rights. And so what they've done is put them all in the Senate Ethics Committee, which is, that part is not uncommon, but we do have a couple interesting things. It is chaired at this point by a freshman senator. He is a senator with some experience, Max Burns, that experience being he was a congressman actually a while back. John Barrow beat him to get his seat in the US House. But it's fascinating to see a freshman senator chairing a committee that has by far the most controversial and consequential issues of this legislative session, dozens of bills in front of him. Another really interesting thing is that the committee really hasn't met yet. And we think that there is a lot of disarray and a lot of disagreement among members of the Republican caucus, as well as disagreements with the lieutenant governor, who has been pretty clear that he does not want to, eliminate absentee voting. We have 4 bills that would sort of do that, or eliminate, absentee voting, I should say. And I think the speaker has also been clear at various times that he also is not interested in taking that step. I think they're somewhat caught between a rock and a hard place, and part of it is, of course, a problem of their making, which is that they enabled Trump not only throughout his entire presidency, but also since November 3rd, when he began the egregious campaign to try to overturn the election results. They enabled the disinformation. We have just, if y'all want to read some of the acts that have been taken by Senate Republicans, it's actually over half of the chairmen in the chamber have taken action since November 3rd, furthering the disinformation and enabling the lies. Stephen Fowler and some other reporters at GPB just published a piece. So we had, over half of the chairmen actively involved in this attempted coup. So the bills haven't really gotten heard yet. There were going to be 4 of them heard this morning in 2 different subcommittees, but they now are being heard tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., which is also not accidental. They will be live streamed. We were trying to make sure that they were going to be live streamed. My office was, and there's like no information coming out of ethics. And when I say that, I mean, we didn't know, we couldn't get an answer on whether they'd be live streamed. Senator Harold Jones, who's on ethics, had not been told if he was on subcommittee A or subcommittee B. That is just bizarre and totally unprecedented. So I think there's, like I said, just disagreement about what their path forward is. They enabled the lies, but they also know that, and they know their voters believe the lies, and they need their voters to vote. So they're stuck between that and the fact that this viewpoint is based on a ton of lies, and the fact that a lot of voters actually get that it's based on a ton of lies and are not and see through what they're trying to do. So if they're doing things that look like blatant voter suppression, not just Democrats, independents, centrists, the educated suburbanites that they really want to be able to woo back, see what they're up to, and they're not particularly impressed. So that's where I think some of their angst about how exactly to go forward is coming from. We also supposedly are going to be getting an omnibus bill that's really long from the Senate Majority Leader. I know we don't, have all the time in the world, so I won't go into specifics about that, except that it is much delayed and obviously also a source of controversy. So tomorrow morning at 7, tune in. Hopefully it will be live streamed, and in which case it will be available on the website as an archive. And I know that groups will be there representing and fighting back against these bills. Because they have delayed so long, I am expecting that we will see a huge rush all of a sudden. Some of this, I think, could even be strategic. I don't think all of it is, but I think some of it could be. So everyone should be on high alert. They're going to have to move quickly here. Our caucus is going to try to engage in our own set of negotiations. They have several constitutional amendments that they're interested in passing. They cannot pass constitutional amendments without the votes of Democrats. And we certainly are making it clear that if they have something they want to pass, and it's, like some of these constitutional amendments, we don't have any members that are interested in them in any particular way. Well, if they want to pass that, then they need to have a conversation with us about something that we would like to pass or something that we would like to see not pass. So it's going to be interesting. We have a whole bunch of proactive voter access bills that we have filed, and I know the House has filed a good number as well. I'll just quickly mention, because it was on the agenda, 4 of them that I'm the lead sponsor for. One would create a permanent absentee list. So, and this legislation I actually worked on with Saira and Amber McReynolds at Vote at Home, as well as Sarah Tyndall-Ghazal last year. So I introduced it last year before the COVID shutdown, before we even knew what was going to be coming our way in terms of absentee voting. I didn't get a hearing then, so I'm not totally hopeful I'll get a hearing now. But what it would do is, y'all are aware that if you're over 65 or, a couple other categories, you can elect to continue to receive an absentee ballot during a cycle. You don't have to send in the application every single time. This obviously makes all the sense in the world because it cuts down on a lot of work that the county elections officials have to do processing absentee ballots. It would add a lot more certainty around staffing, time, and cost. So it would open up that option basically to everybody. And there would be in the bill, and that's let's see, SB 38. There are certain conditions under which someone could be removed from it or remove their name if they so wish. Another bill that I'm a sponsor of is SB 99. That bill would allow the early vote locations to be open as well on election day. So on Tuesday of election day, so that individuals who live in one part of the county and work in another part of the county don't have to risk not being able to vote because they work, the majority of the day, and they work, a fairly long drive from their business. So people would be able to then go to another part of DeKalb that's convenient for them during the day and still cast their vote at those early vote centers. Another bill, SB 35, would allow poll workers to be from any county. Right now, you can only work when it's a county that you are a resident of, and it's just sort of an arbitrary requirement. And as we saw with COVID, when many of our experienced poll workers were not going to be able to work the June primary, we need to be able to have a bigger supply, and it just would make all the sense in the world. We did much better in November because people really stepped up once they knew what was coming. but I still think it makes a lot of sense. And then also the last one, and this is something that I've worked with DeKalb County on, SB 147 would allow for the early voting, the early vote centers to be open on Saturday or Sunday or both before the Tuesday election. Right now, state law says that they all need to be shut down by that Friday is the last day for early voting. There's none allowed in-person early voting. There's none allowed on Saturday or Sunday or Monday. So this would allow, at a county's option, those to stay open on Saturday, Sunday, or both, depending on what the local government would like to do.
Great, thank you. Saira, did you want to add anything? It sounds like you've worked with Senator Parent on some of these.
No, I mean, you know, the rollover list for absentee ballots. I mean, it's such a fabulous idea, and some of the other ideas are so wonderful. And I would love, we'll see if we get hearings on any of them. You know, but I do want to point out something that I think is a little bit funny. So, you know, the Secretary of State, obviously they have a role in all this, right? And they've really been pushing back on this narrative that there were any issues with the integrity of Georgia's election. And that has caused to more infighting within the Republican Party. I know Senator Parent was speaking about some of the infighting, but we also have this, you know, the Secretary of State that's playing a role. And, you know, Secretary of State Raffensperger is enjoying some, you know, very positive approval numbers at the moment. So it's an opinion that can't be ignored. But on every press statement that they have put out last year, they had a blurb affixed to the end of every press statement that they put out. And I'll just read the first sentence of that blurb because I think it's something everybody should know. So this is from the Secretary of State's office. Georgia is recognized as a national leader in elections. It was the first state in the country to implement the trifecta of automatic voter registration, at least 16 days of early voting, which has been called the gold standard, and no excuse absentee voting. So that is something that the Secretary was taking credit for, celebrating as a very good thing. And I want to say, you know, these things are on the chopping block right now. So just, you know, it just really goes to show the bipolar nature of what is going on right now. And you know, I actually don't know if this is still affixed to the Secretary of State's press releases, but it would be pretty funny if it was. So that's a tidbit. Yeah,
that's great. I'm going to go back to Senator Parent for another question, and it's a little bit different twist here, but I know it's something that's near and dear to her heart, and that is really to talk about gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is, you know, it really is the ultimate in kind of voter suppression, and this is a really important year with it being redistricting this year. So maybe you can speak a little bit about, you know, what your caucus has been thinking about in terms of trying to assure that we have fair maps this year.
Thank you, Janet, and thank you for the opportunity to mention redistricting, and also for all the work that you have done and will continue to do with fair districts and other groups on trying to achieve fair maps for us here in Georgia. So I do want to put in a big request for everyone on this call to be on high alert as we move into the redistricting season. Y'all may have seen that the numbers are quite delayed. The Census Bureau is now saying, I think it might be end of September before they think that we'll have the state level data necessary to redistrict, which means that we could be doing it very rapidly. And as you know, that's even more dangerous than doing it slowly. So the main big ask is the more eyes that we have on this process and people paying attention, the better maps we will get, even if they don't put into place any of the much needed reforms that I'm going to mention momentarily. I think that many people since the last census have come to realize how foundational redistricting and gerrymandering are to achieving the public policy that they would like to see. If you have your maps gerrymandered to, for example, here in Georgia, ensure the Republican majority, well, you're gonna not be able to make any progress on any of the other issues you care about, whether it's voting rights, common sense gun reforms, environmental reforms, all of it, right? And it ends up skewing public policy further when you've got these safe districts. I always think of the campus carry bill as one of the bills that to me seemed like a clear case of gerrymandering causing us to have bad public policy in Georgia. And that was because the reason they passed that was they had more members of their caucus worried about being defeated in a primary than they were worried about a general. And as the districts got closer and as Democrats have had gains in Georgia, we have not seen nearly as many of these bad gun bills moving because now they have to answer to the bigger electorate. But the point is that is a skewed public policy result at the outset. It meant that the Republican primary voters are the ones basically in a large sense charting the course for public policy for Georgia, when really it needs to be the broad, 60% of the electorate. And other people may put that differently, but I think y'all understand what I mean. So we have two bills. In fact, one I just introduced today, which is the Transparency Act. And what it would do is set out in statute for the first time a process that would need to be followed during the redistricting process. Things like the maps being accessible on the website and for a certain amount of time before any votes could be taken, public hearings, data that is underpinning the maps, the ability for people to provide comment. The goal, of course, being that we don't want this, and no Georgian really does. It's just those who are in power that would like to keep it that way, like this secretive process where they just pop the maps out and they're like, vote now for this. By actually having a meaningfully transparent process, we believe that not only is that the right thing to do and good for democracy, but we do believe that we'll see fairer maps for the citizens of Georgia. So we are going to be releasing a press statement on that legislation very soon. I think it's SB 186, either 186 or 187. So just introduced today. The other legislation is one that I've worked on for many years. It's a constitutional amendment that would require an independent redistricting commission. That is the gold standard, and I wholeheartedly support it. Where we stop drawing the maps. I mean, get real, like legislators who are interested in their own seat safety and their political party's power are the worst people to draw any maps. In our democracy, the voters are supposed to be the ones in charge. I am pushing for that bill too. But I think that the Republicans are not inclined to pass it because they want to abuse the power that they have to gerrymander the maps to the extent possible. So our strategy has to be three-pronged. We've got our legislative strategy. We've got our grassroots engagement strategy, which is where all of you come in. And we've got our litigation strategy. So Georgia is a key focus of a lot of the national groups on redistricting. And that is because a lot of the states that were gerrymandered egregiously after 2010 have now either passed independent commissions. A lot of states have done it by collecting signatures to put it on the ballot. We don't have that ability here, unfortunately. Either they've done independent commissions. They're, in the case of Pennsylvania and North Carolina, their state Supreme Courts were able to utilize their state constitutions to reform their process. We also don't have a good constitution for that. And others like Michigan and Wisconsin now have Democratic governors. The legislature is still Republican, but they no longer have a trifecta in those swing states. So we're one of the few, us and Texas, where we really think that they are going to be looking to wring all the gains that they possibly can out of the maps. And so I'm certainly expecting that we'll also be seeing litigation. But the first step is, I don't think they get that people now get this issue and are going to be engaged. And we need to engage as many people as possible, because the more people that understand it and see what's going on, not just Democrats, the more they'll be turned off. It's just more voter suppression, and we need to make them pay at the ballot box if they try to do what I'm expecting them to do.
Great, thank you. Very comprehensive answer. I'm going to turn it back to Susan to kind of switch our focus here.
Well, I did notice Representative Nguyen, did you have some bills that you said you wanted to share with us at this time?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. And I wanted to mention this because I think one of the things that we've seen in the last year is the messaging around voting has just been overtaken by Republicans pushing forward a false narrative that we somehow have an elections integrity issue related to fraud. But the reality is what we really need to be talking about is how real voter suppression is. And some of the things that we haven't gotten to talk about as much is, which we have talked about in the past few years, are things like voter purging, which we saw increase under Brian Kemp when he was Secretary of State, and then continued under Secretary of State Raffensperger. In 2019, there were 300,000 voters who were purged off the voter rolls. At least 20,000 of those voters were incorrectly purged and had to be reinstated by the Secretary of State. But up to 200,000 of those voters still live in the state of Georgia, and some of them have re-registered to vote. He is able to do that voter purging under the use it or lose it voter purging policy that effectively allows the Secretary of State to take people off the voter rolls if they choose to sit out on an election. That has been a massive disenfranchisement tool, and we are no longer talking about it, though it still impacts Georgians. Following the Rudy Giuliani committee hearing, we did have another hearing with the Secretary of State, and right off the bat, he came in saying, because of federal prohibitions under the Federal Voting Rights Act, I am not able to clean up the voter rolls in the way in which I want to. But my question is to him, what else do you want to do since you are already wrongly purging Georgians? And that was happening under Kemp, continuing to happen under Raffensperger, and happening to people who simply choose to sit out on an election, which to me is an active choice a voter is making because they are not selecting a candidate for one reason or the other, or they simply don't feel that they want to participate in that particular election. So I have legislation to end voter purging due to the use it or lose it or inactive voting policy. The second major piece of legislation I want to talk about is felony disenfranchisement. I've signed on to a bill to eliminate felony disenfranchisement, period. In the state of Georgia, if you are convicted with a felony, you are not allowed to vote. If you have served your time and you are released, but you are on parole, you owe fees, or you're on probation, you are not allowed to vote. There are some serious implications with that particular law, given that it is a law that was introduced following Reconstruction to further disenfranchise Black voters in the South, and specifically disproportionately impacting Black men in Georgia and across the country. I also particularly feel that the bill becomes even more immoral when we consider that we use those who are incarcerated for census counts, which is why there are many prisons that are built in rural South Georgia so that we have bodies who can help us get federal funding, but they are still not allowed to vote. And in times of crisis, like the pandemic, we are ignoring people who are incarcerated, who are a high-risk population, who are getting sick and not able to have access to safe conditions, access to healthcare, and are not being considered for vaccinations, even though they have no choice in terms of being able to be mobile, and they are an at-risk population. So when we talk about felony disenfranchisement, it is impossible for people to hold their elected officials accountable for not providing safe environments and conditions in jails and prisons because they are not allowed to vote. So elected officials do not have to respond to any of the things that are happening, which are massive human rights violations. And then I just want to share a quick story about it. I was a poll watcher for the November election on election day in Fulton County. And a man walked up to me and he said, "Hey, I just have a question. Can I use my prison ID to vote?" And I said, "Yes, you can." And he said, "I just got out. I did not want to vote." And he had his little daughter with him. She was probably 5 or 6 years old. And he said, "But my daughter begged me to vote, and so did my mother. They said this was a critical election and I have to get out and vote." So he went inside, and I was really excited for him. It appeared to be like a celebratory moment, because we do get really excited when we get to share in voters' experiences with casting their ballots. And in this particular situation, it was a really touching story. But he came out a few minutes later and he said, "I'm not allowed to vote." And he said, "But I got a letter in the mail when I finished serving my sentence that said I could be reinstated for voting, and my mom sent it in." And I said, "Do you have a copy of that letter? Can I look at it? If you have a copy, I can run it up to our voter protection hotline and see what's going on." Well, it turns out that was a conditional letter that said he could re-register to vote if he met a set of conditions, including paying off fines and being off probation. And he had not been off probation yet. And so he was turned away. But what was specifically hard about that situation was he was so embarrassed and ashamed and disappointed because his daughter was with him. And we had to tell him, "No, you do not have the right to vote in the state of Georgia, even though you served your time. It is because you are still on probation." So I do want to uplift that bill, because we know that a bill like that is not going to be at the forefront of people's minds, but it's certainly something that we need to change in Georgia law.
Great, thank you. I think we need to shift gears a little bit here. Part of this was intended to be about how we're going to fight back, what people can do. So we want to get some advice from you all on ways that we can become involved and fight back, keep these things from happening. Janet, did you want to start with the asking about the
Sure.
public perception?
Yeah, sure. So public perception has changed recently because of all the gross misinformation from the former president and conspiracy theories, which has already been spoken to a little bit tonight. But a recent AJC poll indicated that 38% of Georgia voters thought that there was significant fraud in the November election, and nearly 3/4 of voters thought that there needed to be additional verification for absentee voting. So how do you feel is the best way that we can dispel that kind of myth about voter fraud and return confidence to the voters? Hillary, maybe we'll start with you, because you're really you and Fair Fight are at the front of this fight.
Yeah, so that AJC poll, first off, was very interesting and contradictory within itself. At the top part of the poll, you read through and it says, oh, like all the things that you just said. There is trust, there's a firm belief in the voter fraud myth that had been, pushed by the Secretary of State. But then below the poll, it also said that nearly half of Georgia voters don't think that they should make it harder to vote by mail. And so right now, there is a lot of conversations with some other people that's really trying to dig into the actual perception. We think that we need another poll to see exactly where voters are. But when it comes to trying to bring back trust into the system, the first thing we have to do is actually talk about what the real problems are for voting, right? Because some people are saying, oh, well, 2020, the elections were actually okay. And that just wasn't true. We still have the infamous June 9th primary where the AJ said it was a complete disaster or a complete meltdown. there were several issues with vote by mail, but when it came to the Secretary of State not supporting the counties and helping process and all the tactics that they built up in 2019, and they were trying to deal with a new voting equipment system as well in the middle of a massive presidential election. And so we still have to continue to have the conversation that voter suppression is real. But when we talk about voter fraud, what my colleague, our research director, Sosa, has really drilled into my brain, our communications team's brain, and a lot of our friends and allied organization is whenever we go to talk about, combating the myth of voter fraud, we always have to lead with the truth. So we always have to say the myth of voter fraud is not correct. Here are actual issues that we must address. And however even though there are issues, here's what you can do to educate yourself and your community on how to make sure that your vote counts. So always framing the conversation from a voter and an empowering way, and really making sure that we're instilling hope. But acknowledging that it is hard. So for vote by mail and voting, you have to do tons of research that is unfair on the voters. But because of the work, like with voter education, down from the Democratic Party to Fair Fight to the third party organizations, elected officials, like Senator Parent and Representative Nguyen talking to their constituents, there's ways to go about this. But Fair Fight does have a plan of doing a lot of voter engagement this year, voter education, making sure that we continue talking to voters, even though it's so-called an off year, which we all know it's not. So stay tuned. We're doing some mini town hall series that would feature Stacy, myself, our CEO, Lauren Growargo, making sure that it's around the state, not just in Metro Atlanta. And so we are building on that. But to circle back to your question about fighting the voter fraud myth, it's making sure that we just continue to do what we do because we know how to, we know the issues, we know how to mitigate voter suppression. That is why we won. And as long as we continue to build and have everything centered in our truth and our knowledge, then they will have to deal with the mess that they created. It's very unfortunate. But we're gonna keep going, and we're gonna keep doing what we're doing because it works.
Great, it's the fight. So we've got lots of questions from the audience that we want to pivot here to in a minute, but I thought first let's ask both Senator Parent and Representative Nguyen, just in a few words, what are the most effective things that you think that these several hundred people on this call can do in order to advocate on these issues? Senator Parent?
Well, I think that clearly contacting the leadership of both chambers, the Republican leadership, is good. Phone, email, both. But more important than that, I think, is attempting to organize, to find connections with people in districts who have Republican elected officials so that they hear from their constituents. Everyone in DeKalb, and I know some of you on this call don't live in DeKalb, but probably the vast majority of you have Democratic elected officials. It doesn't do that much good if you're emailing and calling me, right? It's not that I don't love to hear from you, and I would say, what's wrong if I heard from no one on this issue? So I'm not really saying that, but I'm saying like your time is better spent trying to connect with, forming networks around the state. And obviously Fair Fight and other groups are in a good position to do this with people who reside in these individuals' districts that they hear from their constituents. I agree with Hillary that keeping focused on the truth and staying on message is really important. The reality is that everything that they have been saying, and that unfortunately their folks believe, is all built on a foundation of complete lies. And that can't survive forever. I will say that I don't see a particularly easy way right now to knock it down, because the reality is that the reason they think that is because people they trusted, like Trump, told them it was true. So people they trust and believe have to tell them that it's not true, which is one of the reasons that I've been clear about, and frankly, Gabe Sterling's remarks during the counting process were significant, because, you know, if you've taken a position of leadership, show some leadership, tell your people the truth. And we've been repeating that down at the Senate. You know, my Republican colleagues need to tell their people the truth. Mitch McConnell, as much as I hate him, has recently been saying some things, you know, to say like, this was unacceptable and this is what the truth is. A lot more like that needs to be done. This is a mess, like Hillary said, of their own making. And we can do certain things, but the reality is these voters are not going to be disabused of these notions unless they hear it from people they trust. And that's why Trump is so dangerous and why he's done real damage to our country. And that was obvious back in 2016. Mm-hmm. So that was depressing.
Representative Nguyen, your perspective? What can we do to be the most effective citizen advocates?
You know, I agree with a lot of the things that Hillary and Senator Parent said. It is hard because when you contact somebody like me or Senator Parent, we are already with y'all, but I do think there are a couple of things that would be helpful. For instance, some of these bills related to election boards, I do think it's important to engage our local election boards, because oftentimes they don't even know about these bills. For example, we did call Fulton County ahead of one of the hearings on the bill that put the prohibition for issuance of absentee ballots 10 days in advance, and they opposed that bill. But they did not know that the Georgia, I think it's the county association had made a comment that the local elections boards actually were in support of it, but it wasn't true that all of them were. So to have them be able to advocate is important. I think anyone who is familiar with election laws or worked in the election, testifying in committee is always good. You know, we do rely on witnesses to come to committee and be able to offer an alternative to some of the lies and misinformation that are being peddled by Georgia Republicans. And then I think something critical is the Georgia Chamber issued a statement that was somewhat vague, but also said that they agreed that our election laws were in line with other states and they shouldn't be changed. And as we know, in the Georgia General Assembly, business chambers have a lot of influence over the Republican Party. So tapping into spaces like that is really important. And then I would say that we have to constantly, during election year, off election year, during legislative session, off legislative session, always talk to our neighborhoods, our neighbors, our friends, anyone we know, and educate them about election laws. They're very, very confusing. They change very rapidly. You know, one of the reasons I think the poll that came back from the AJC around people wanting, saying that they supported additional documentation or ID laws is because there's a fundamental misunderstanding of how it actually works and how secure it is. And if we are reading all the time about people saying there's all this fraud, the average voter is not going to understand the same nuances as people who are super involved or pay attention to committee meetings. So it's always engaging with the people that you know around what's happening. And I found it super helpful during both primary, general, and Senate to post things on my neighborhood board. And people were so helpful to all of their neighbors, describing all the issues that they faced and how to fix them, especially as we were trying to roll out vote by mail. So I think that type of engagement all year round is really critical.
Great, thank you. Well, let's get to some of our audience questions. We have several folks that have asked about the possible passage of what's called now the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and what impact that would have on these bills that are proposed and if they would be passed. Who would like to speak to that? I don't know, Saira, is that an area that you can speak to?
I'll pass on if in case somebody else wants to speak on it first.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Who else?
Well, real quick, I'll just say that I think they want to get through COVID relief in Washington and a couple other big things. And then I do think that's going to be a big topic of conversation. Certainly many of the provisions in the legislation would be very helpful. The big challenge, of course, is it's a huge bill and it would get filibustered in the Senate. So it gets right into the issue of do they eliminate the filibuster, which is, very, very fraught. So we have to kind of wait and see. And then if there are these common sense things that Americans largely agree on within that bill, even if they pull things out, right? Instead of trying to do the whole thing, and pressure really builds and the Republicans are blocking something that Americans by and large really disagree with, then maybe then they'll have the motivation as well as the political cover to eliminate the filibuster. But I think it's going to be a lengthy process to get there.
Yeah, so this is something that we're paying very close attention to, and we are talking to members of Congress about this, because what's happening in our legislature is not unique. It's happening in Arizona, Pennsylvania, Texas, Michigan, Florida, just to name a few. There are hundreds of anti-voting rights pieces of legislation dropping right now that will most likely be passed in a 30 to 60 day time period. And so what we're doing is actually, as always, Georgia is constantly leading. And so what we're doing is we're working with our friends in other states to, walk through how they can fight back in their legislature. Because what will happen is, so these bills, that we'll fight them. Most of them will most likely pass because that's just the makeup, but we're going to give them hell. And but what will happen is, and then Senator Parent is 100% correct. The Biden administration is 100% focused on COVID relief. Democracy initiatives will be next. And so right now we think that the first hearings in Congress will begin in late March or April, meaning that we might not get the John Lewis bill passed until at least this summer or early fall. And so one reason why we're making sure that other states are fighting just as hard as Georgia is because, let's say all these bills pass, but then Congress delivers because of Georgia. They get the John Lewis Act signed into law. What will happen then is then they're going to have to go and litigate state by state by state to basically get federal and court rulings. And we all know that there's still a lot of issues with our courts because Trump was able to pack them with Mitch McConnell. And so there is a lot of strategic conversations going on and trying to build out this broader narrative. And so we do have a lot of work ahead of us. And that's one reason, at the beginning of this call, y'all showed, we had Leader Abrams do a press call with Mark Elias last week, because he is also looking at suing over a lot of these bills. So as we always say, this is a marathon and not a sprint. We have to get through session and then deal with the courts, Congress passing this, trying to get all this figured out this year. So when we're walking into 2022, we can really try to at least have democracy be as strong as it can, or know exactly what we're working with in each state. So then we can come back, reassess, and all the organizers and on the party side, every side can then be like, okay, what do we need to do to help voters overcome these obstacles? So that's a lengthy answer because it's super complex, but it is something that is, it's a very good question. So thank you for raising that.
And actually, Hillary, while we have you on camera here, there was another question specifically for you. And now, of course, I'm not going to find the specific wording, but it was something along the lines of that we did get inundated by all the applications for vote by mail. in these last couple of elections? And is that something that, caused confusion for voters and is an area that maybe we could, quote, give on in, any negotiations to come?
So here's the thing. They have continued to try to make third parties from sending absentee ballot request forms very difficult. And I will say it was a lot on voters this cycle, because as Georgians know, this was the first year that America actually took us seriously. I mean, like to be clear, they didn't take 2018 seriously. We then had to fight them, and finally they listened in 2020. And so there was a lot of people just throwing stuff at Georgia. But one of the best things that happened in the runoff, outside of getting Senator Warnock and Ossoff elected, is Georgia was actually able to really formalize this amazing existing infrastructure that already existed. And rather than having the national people just throw mailings left and right to Georgians, there was actually a coordinated effort on all the different sides of, whether it's the campaign side, they had their own effort, the IEs had their own effort. And so there's actually a lot more organization and communication, but it was a learning process. So I think being inundated with the mail was one of the big takeaways of how do we work together in 2022 and moving forward to not confuse voters like that. But that's something that we have to work out as organizations, and that shouldn't impact, third parties from sending out absentee ballot applications. That's just a deal breaker for fair fight.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Well, we are really out of time, and I wish we could get to all of the questions. This has been a fabulous panel, and Susan and I can't thank enough Senator Parent, Representative Nguyen, Saira, and Hillary for joining us tonight. We all have a lot of work to do, and supporting you all in the legislature and the organizations that are fighting this on the front lines. As you heard from Senator Parent, tune in at 7 a.m. tomorrow for the Senate Ethics subcommittees to hear a few of the bills that are starting to move in the Senate. And I believe the full Senate Ethics Committee is scheduled on Thursday morning as well. So this is changing every day, and we will continue to keep you up to date. And Susan and our voting rights team will continue to look at messaging to you in terms of being able to get you information about how you can engage and advocate. So thank you. Susan, any last words?
A big thank you also. I hope everyone found it worthwhile, and unfortunately, time is a problem always, and I wish we could have gotten to more of your questions, but that's reality. So thank you for being here.
Well, we've collected, and we have collected the questions. So if there's any way that we can get those answered and get them back to you and posted on our Facebook page, we will do that. Thank you.
I was wondering also if we might be able to post something on our website. That would be useful.
Yeah, that would be great to do a Q&A on the website. So,
we'll do that.
Okay, well, stay tuned, everyone. Have a good evening, and thank you again to all of our panelists. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
And our co-sponsors and our audience. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.